Warning! Warning! Spoiler alert! For Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, and Star Trek The Original Series. That last warning was for Alex Kurtzman because he has not watched it. Warning! Warning! Spoiler! Spoiler alert!
Okay, well, there's gotta be something good. I hate this stream already. Gotta be something good. Yep. Yeah, good show. Full of heart.
Who cares what I think?
Moonjumper here, welcome to another episode of Who Cares What I Think. Once again, let's talk about Star Trek, specifically the premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. No, wrong show. That Strange New World Singular, a 1975 movie starring John Saxon, which happened to be the third and final installment of a trilogy of TV movies from Gene Roddenberry, which I have done a previous video on, which I'll link down below and at the end of this video. But no, we're talking about Strange New Worlds, plural, the third and presumably not final live-action series in the Alex Kurtzman, Akiva Goldsman era of the Star Trek franchise. The first being the continuity disaster that is Star Trek Discovery, the second being the somewhat canonically more cohesive, yet narratively incoherent Star Trek Picard, which we'll get more into when I drop my third installment of Discovery versus Picard. That'll be an upcoming episode, but first I want to talk about the third Kurtzman-Goldsman live-action series, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which I've got to say, just based on the pilot episode, has to their credit gone a long way. They have taken some major steps to clean up an absolute anti-canonical mess left in Discovery's wake. Now, Strange New Worlds still has its own questionable continuity issues, and we'll get into that, but overall, this is a huge step in the right direction. I want to get this out there, so I'm probably going to limit the visuals. Think of this more as a audio podcast. I'll throw up a few visuals when it's appropriate, but I'm just going to talk. Visually speaking, the Discovery era, at least as far as the 23rd century, is over. This looks much closer to the TOS era we recognize. Starfleet looks like Starfleet. The Federation looks like the Federation. The Enterprise almost looks like the Enterprise. At least she resembles the Enterprise as we knew her, let's put it that way. In fact, we see few, if any, starships which look like all the masses of anachronistic USS WTFs we saw making up the fleet of the Discovery era, which amazingly enough, chronologically speaking, was less than a year ago. Here we are, it is just a few months later, and the uniforms are more era appropriate, the colors are more era appropriate, the props are era appropriate, the shuttles, lots and lots of shuttles, are all era appropriate, not a Discovery shuttle to be found, well, except in the mid-21st century at the beginning of World War III, apparently. So a 21st century design will still be in use in the 23rd, 24th, and 32nd centuries over 1100 years. Go figure. But at least they aren't flying around Starfleet headquarters anymore. We have a true TOS style design, fleets of them buzzing around everywhere. They are beautiful. And the starships look era appropriate. They all have round, cylindrical warp nacelles as they should in this era of Trek history. The USS Archer, which is under the temporary command of Lieutenant Commander Una Chin Riley, aka Number 1, closely resembles Franz Joseph Saladin or Hermes classes. In fact, Memory Alpha claims that it is a Hermes class. I didn't catch if they specified that in the episode or not, so that may or may not be canon. Regardless, a very era appropriate looking starship, although I question it only having 3 crew members because that's not a tiny ship. That's more or less a standard size saucer. Even the sets have a more 1960s TOS feel to them. We see more knobs, buttons, and so-called jelly beans. Sure, it doesn't look exactly like TOS. I'd like to see them go further in transitioning to TOS, but it at least feels closer to the period. This is starting to look like something that could evolve evolve into TOS. It really is an enormous visual change from Discovery to Strange New Worlds, night and day, which couldn't possibly occur in less than a year's time. Basically, the entire fleet, the entire aesthetic look of Starfleet has been completely replaced in less than a year's time, which could never happen, and I don't care. This is a huge win for old school fans, and I will take that win. Furthermore, the pilot was an honest-to-God Star Trek episode, with a self-contained positive message. Captain Pike bringing together two warring factions and convinces them to put their differences aside for a better future. At one point, I did get a little concerned that they were about to pull yet another partisan campaign ad a la President Stacey Abrams when they started flashing video montages of evil Trump voters on January 6th to illustrate how Republicans are solely responsible for humanity nearly destroying itself. However, they did balance it a bit with at least one or two shots of what appears to be Antifa riots, so at least acknowledging that it's not just one side causing the problems, which is supposed to be the whole point of bringing these two factions of aliens together, to not point fingers and assign all the blame to one side. Still, it's a blink and you'll miss the mostly peaceful rioters burning down a city, while the montage focuses a lot more screen time on those horrifying red caps. That kind of creates a slight disconnect where Pike is giving this beautiful, even-handed speech indicating that neither side is evil. You're both good people with equally legitimate grievances for which both sides should have some empathy, but that both sides are also being equally petty, and that's what's going to destroy them. All while that video montage he's playing for them is pointing fingers, looking uncomfortably close to a one-sided partisan campaign ad right before our own real-life midterms. Not that a modern Star Trek series would ever do that. Oh, wait. But again, to their credit, I know it was painful for them. They did at least drop a couple of quick shots of leftist rioting. Blink and you'll miss them, but they're there. So it wasn't completely partisan. Although still very US-centric. Here we are with Russia invading Ukraine and committing genocide. China threatening Taiwan. China and Russia, both nuclear superpowers, not just the United States. But Pike seems to imply that World War III will all be America's fault. Nothing like a little Hollywood America bashing. That said, to be fair, if the United States were to fall into another civil war, and God help us if that happens, that would absolutely throw the entire world into chaos. There's no question about that. So it's not wrong for Star Trek to point that out, and holding a mirror up is classic Star Trek. Well, almost. Classical Star Trek, it was always political, but it was never partisan. And this bunch tends to lean just a little too heavy into the partisanship. They need to watch that. Star Trek is for everyone. Especially because if you are truly worried, Hollywood, about these rising tensions, and we all should be, because I know my greatest generation grandparents, went through worse, but this is certainly the highest tension, kind of scariest point in American and world history that I have lived through, and I'm 51 years old. There is no question we are living through dangerous times. Star Trek is right about that. Then don't keep alienating half your audience. Don't keep throwing gasoline onto the fire. Be Captain Pike, the man who is here trying to lower the temperature between these two warring factions. That is Star Trek. And that's actually how the script appears to have been written, which is good. It would just been nice to have the montage just a little more balanced. But all that said, real life politics aside, in universe, the kind of horror and chaos that Pike is describing both globally and domestically is not at all inconsistent with already established Trek canon and apocrypha, that being novels and comics. So not terrible continuity, actually, with a caveat I'll get to in a second. Bottom line, the overall message, the way Pike's speech was written, is a positive one, and the return to self-contained episodes feels refreshing. The whole show feels refreshing and upbeat compared to what we've had. Anson Mount is great as Christopher Pike. I liked him a lot better here than I did in Discovery, and he was good in Discovery, but he is definitely better here. For one thing, he actually got to be the captain. He was firmly in charge instead of smugly henpecked by Michael Burnham. There was a sense that his crew respects him, at least in the first episode. Second episode, I thought La'an got borderline insubordinate on the bridge, telling Christopher Pike, one of the most decorated officers in the service, what he should already know from his years of experience, but apparently doesn't because, in the Discovery-verse, men are complete morons and must always be duly corrected by a woman. But in the pilot episode, the subordinate roles were a bit more traditional, as they should be. And that has nothing to do with gender. I mean, you would never see Janeway taking lip from Harry Kim or even Tuvok on the bridge. There is a decorum to being a Starfleet officer, and we saw a better example of that in the pilot than in the second episode. Sure, he valued their input, which they offered without berating him, and then, get this, they followed his orders. What a concept. He was much more assertive and projected more confidence, even while privately having grave doubts and regrets. This was very much a callback to the Jeffrey Hunter version of Pike, but with Anson Mount's whimsical humor to provide that perfect balance. Ethan Peck was fantastic. Again, much better here than he was on Discovery. I almost forgot that I wasn't watching young Leonard Nimoy. He was Spock. Period. I have never gotten that feelings from Zachary Quinto. Never. Zachary Quinto played a character with pointed ears who's kind of an asshole, but he wasn't Spock. Ethan Peck is legitimately playing Spock. Young Spock, but definitely Spock. And T'Pring was surprisingly authentic. She was good. She looks like T'Pring. She acts like T'Pring, i.e. don't trust her, Spock. On the other hand, you do kind of get a better understanding and even empathy for her point of view, whereas in Amok Time, she's pretty well just straight up evil. But true to her character, she is a manipulator. I'm hoping to see a lot more of her, and IMDb is indicating that we will, and that's great, because she has me intrigued. So I'm looking forward to that, and okay, yeah, she's hot too, so yeah, damn it, I can still say that, alright? In Texas, we are still allowed to admire beauty, okay? If that offends you, tough. She is gorgeous, and she is great in this role. I'd even say better than the original. Gaia Sandhu, I hope I'm saying her name correctly. She's a fine actress. Excellent. Rebecca Romijn is number 1. I know everybody loves her, but so far, I'm just not impressed. On this show or back on Discovery, I've never gotten any sense that she's playing the same character as Majel Barrett's number 1. And I don't mean that she needs to play her like Majel Barrett played her. Each of these actors need to make the characters their own, but the original number 1 was interesting, even though we knew nothing about her. She just had this powerful, intriguing presence. This version of number 1 is just boring, even though we already know more about her, like her name. She has a sense of humor, she's likable, and yet she's milquetoast. I just don't care about her. So far, we have a whole series left to go. Maybe she'll become a little less sidelined than she's been and become more of a breakout character, although I doubt it because they're clearly pushing La'an to be the big breakout character, and she is interesting if canonically questionable. So we'll see, but thus far, nothing about Una Chen Riley, aka number 1 as portrayed by Rebecca Romijn, grabs me or compels me. So speaking of La'an Noonien-Singh, let's talk about continuity. Now, this will be the section where it may sound like I'm complaining or nitpicking, or sometimes I'm just kind of asking questions, kind of thought bubbles. And sometimes I may sound kind of blunt and kind of get off my lawn type of thing, but don't anybody misunderstand about this. The show was actually good. I did enjoy it because clearly not nearly the mess that Discovery was, at least out of the gate. Unlike Discovery, which doesn't fit period. This almost feels like it could possibly exist within the same universe as the original series. Almost. Visually, if Discovery had looked like Strange New Worlds, I actually think people would have been generally fine with it. I think I would have been fine with it. Yes, everything is still somehow 25% different, but for once, it's at least recognizable. Discovery was 90% unrecognizable, but they had a cool phaser. Besides that, the there was no visual connection to classic Trek whatsoever. And this series seems determined to change that, and good for them. Because previously, they told us it couldn't be done. Well, here's the proof that it can be done. I still have issues with the changes to the Enterprise, but, we'll table that for now. In fact, let's put all the visuals aside, and let's talk about story continuity. Because they keep insisting that this is not a reboot. This is all in continuity with the original series, with TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. And by extension, Picard, and yes, even Discovery, which Strange New Worlds does rather skillfully reference, despite it seeming like a completely different universe. I kind of wondered if they might play it a bit like Superman and Lois, where we know it's a spin-off of Supergirl, featuring the same actors introduced on Supergirl, and yet now that they have their own series, which actually doesn't suck, they have gone out of their way to not reference Supergirl, which did suck, and they know it sucked, and they don't want to have anything to do with it, to the point that we're not even completely sure they're in the same continuity with one another. I mean, we assume they are, but no references whatsoever, very few. Having seen the trailers for Strange New Worlds, which seem to be pivoting as far away from Discovery as they could for a more TOS feel, I wouldn't have been shocked if Strange New Worlds had done the same thing as Superman and Lois, and just never mentioned Discovery again. And I suspect a lot of people would be just fine with that. However, the pilot does reference Discovery, and in a way that actually works. Pike is dealing with having seen his tragic future. That happened in Discovery's second season, and now it's weighing heavily on him. And Anson Mount plays it perfectly, just like Jeffrey Hunter dealt with the grief and burden of command. Michael Burnham and the Discovery crew, they are very immature, very CW. Pike is an adult.
Well, technically,
you were warned.
Look, let's talk about this. Find some common ground.
Yeah, maybe I spoke too soon. That was a clip from episode 2, Children of the Comet, which I just watched and was not all that impressed. That was a CW episode, like Legends of Tomorrow or The Flash. Everyone's all cutesy and sassy. However, I did like the ending, especially the precept of don't be so smug and quick to dismiss someone's religious faith. I'm looking at you, Jean-Luc Picard. There may be some truth behind it after all. We saw examples of that in the original series, but especially Deep Space Nine. At a certain point, Sisko no longer referred to the prophets as wormhole aliens, a very dismissive description. He began referring to them as prophets, and essentially became a believer. And that's not to say that there's no science involved. Why assume that God or any other higher being, if they exist, are not a part of science, just because we don't yet have the scientific knowledge to explain them or detect them? What is a prophet? A person or being with the ability to see the future, such as the prophets of Bajor or the alien intelligence guiding this comet in episode 2 of Strange New Worlds. So I liked that at the end. And I gotta say, number 1 was much better in the second episode. Much more like the character we knew from The Cage. There was a very nice character moment between her and Pike at the end, discussing his fate, and there was an old school Star Trek maturity about it. It was very nice. It felt like the ending was written by a completely different writer than what made up the bulk of the episode, which was immature and cartoonish. Unlike the adult we saw in the pilot, Pike seems very jokey and adolescent in the middle of a life and death negotiation with a superior military power. Completely out of character for any veteran officer of his stature and position, let alone Pike. And that is also important to continuity. The continuity of characters, the continuity of Starfleet as a serious organization to be respected by foreign powers. Throughout the episode, Ortegas was annoying, very unprofessional for a military officer. Starfleet's not military. To hell it's not. And she didn't annoy me in the pilot. When Pike was acting like an adult, setting an example. It was nice having an adult in command again, for all of one episode. So back to the pilot episode, that's basically all I have to say about episode 2. I mean, the story was fine, pretty classic Trek, if a bit derivative, but I did not like the childishness. But the pilot was much better, and as I was talking about, tied into Discovery in a very clever and unintrusive way. Even managing to cleverly tie Strange New Worlds first contact scenario into Such Sweet Sorrow, Discovery's second season finale, offering some continuity without beating us over the head with it to remind us how god-awful it was. I don't need reminding. Because apparently that ridiculous battle with Section 31/Control and the wormhole which formed a time portal to the 32nd century so that Discovery could be free from canon was all witnessed from the telescopes of this contemporary 21st century civilization, which happens to be much like our own, and which inspires them to create warp technology prematurely. Thanks, Michael Burnham, you everything up again. So re-enter Christopher Pike to clean it all up for you again. So there's a definite continuity there, and yet it's one that works organically and unobtrusively. It's just kind of in the background. We mention it, we even see one image of the Discovery entering the wormhole, and that's it. We move on. It's a new show which looks and feels nothing like the old show. I thought they handled that extremely well. But will everything now line up with the original series or not? Is it in continuity or is it a straight up reboot? Or maybe I should say like a soft reboot in which it's an offshoot timeline from the original timeline. I've theorized here. I'll throw up my little graph here. I've theorized how that could work if the temporal Cold War caused some kind of a rift somewhere around the time of Enterprise. In fact, the other day I was just reading one of the Prodigy guys, one of the I think it was one of the Hegeman brothers or one of the Prodigy producers said that he wondered if it could be something like that as well, and that's not official. He was just speaking off the cuff. But yeah, it's what so many of us have been saying. If it's another timeline, that's fine. Actually, I just thought it doesn't even have to be the temporal Cold War. Wesley Crusher just openly admitted to screwing up 100 years of history. He didn't say what century, but I wonder if that was supposed to be a little wink and a nod that okay, we know we kind of screwed everything up. But if it is not another timeline, if Wesley didn't screw it up, or if the temporal Cold War didn't screw it up, if it is truly a direct prequel to the original series, then it has got to line up with the original series and the rest of Star Trek. Well, we do know for sure that Strange New Worlds doesn't quite line up with the animated series because, well, this is Commodore Robert April, former captain of the Enterprise, and this is Admiral Robert April, former captain of the Enterprise. Now, before anybody starts screaming at me, Captain Sisko is the best captain in the history of the franchise, period, full stop. Okay, this is not about race, this is about continuity. And that includes story continuity, not just the visual. In fact, I'll say right up front, I love this version of Robert April, and Adrian Holmes is awesome in the role. I'm thrilled he's been cast. So, the obvious aside, Strange New Worlds is set in 2259. The animated series is set in 2269. That's a full 10 years later, at which point we learn that Robert April has apparently been demoted from Admiral to Commodore. Not to mention he's a Brit, at least according to his accent, and that's what's been generally accepted in all of the non-canon novels. Robert April, as played by Adrian Holmes, has an American accent. Now, for years, CBS has treated the animated series as canon. Memory Alpha, which, okay, is not part of CBS, they have no IP authority, nonetheless, Memory Alpha treats it as canon, and we know that's where Alex Kurtzman gets all his information. He doesn't actually watch Star Trek. Furthermore, millions of fans, especially fans of a certain age, myself included, consider the animated series to be canon, and it is without question in continuity and canon to Lower Decks, by the way. Is Lower Decks canon? Well, so far CBS seems to be treating it as canon, or at least they haven't said that it's not canon. So that does present at least a minor continuity issue, even though, yes, there are a lot of people, a lot of fans, particularly younger fans, who dismiss the animated series as kind of obscure and non-canonical. It's just a cartoon. I disagree with that, but I get it. And frankly, the Counterclock incident, the animated episode which which introduced Robert April to the canon, actually has some weird continuity quirks of its own. Plus, let's not forget, this is the same series which gave us pink Kazinti ships because one of the Filmation animators was colorblind. So color is definitely not an issue. However, the rank issue is a bit of a problem. What they should have done is, rather than make him an admiral in Strange New Worlds, he should have been promoted to fleet captain. That way, later on, he will have been promoted to Commodore rather than demoted from admiral to Commodore, which is most unfortunate. So, Adrian Holmes, great actor, no issue with the casting, although I do have an issue with the rank, and to a lesser degree, although it's not strictly canon, it's always been assumed that he was a Brit. James Doohan voiced him as a Brit, and he's always been referred to as a Brit in all the, granted, apocryphal sources, but he appears to be American in this, which, I think he should have been a Brit. Speaking of Brit, John Winston is a Brit. John Winston played Lieutenant Kyle in the original series and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Now, there's a couple of novels that refer to him as an Aussie. I don't know where the hell they got that, because he's got an English accent and the actor is English. Anyway, André Day Kim is a very talented Canadian actor, Asian, North American accent, is also playing a transporter chief whose name, perhaps coincidentally, happens to be Kyle. Really? Don't start in on me. I don't even want to hear it. No one has any issue with an Asian character in Star Trek. We all love Sulu. I absolutely adore Hoshi. Who doesn't like Harry Kim? But did you really have to name him Kyle? Seriously? Are you implying that Kim is playing the same well-established Englishman we all know from 3 seasons of the original series and Star Trek The Wrath of Khan? Because you just heard me give a pass to the first ever live-action appearance of Robert April. But John Winston did not play a one-off cameo in an obscure cartoon. He played a regular recurring character on the original series, which is not only categorically canon, it is the canon, upon which everything else, including this series, or so you claim, is based and built upon. Unless this is a reboot. If this is a reboot, it doesn't matter. You can name him Young Scotty for all I care. But is this in continuity or isn't it? Because you could have named him anything you wanted and no one would care. But this feels like trolling. Enough said, moving on. Dr. Mbinga, one of the coolest, underutilized Star Trek characters of all time. I am all for him being in this series, but why is Dr. Mbinga currently serving as the chief medical officer on Strange New Worlds? Now, no problem with that, but you realize that he's going to be demoted years later when a white guy, a southern white guy, Leonard McCoy, takes over as chief medical officer. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe he stepped down by choice, didn't want to be CMO anymore. That's cool, but regardless, we are now facing a rather, shall we say, problematic scenario of having not one, but 2 black characters in prominent roles of authority who are both going to be demoted in a few years if this show, this prequel, is indeed in continuity with the actual original timeline. And you can't blame the source material for that. The source material didn't demote them. Just saying. Speaking of, it's not a continuity issue, but where's Dr. Boyce? He was Pike's closest confidant. Maybe he's retired, but a mention would be nice. What happened to J.M. Colt or Jose Tyler? I'd like to know. Y'all keep shoehorning in all these characters from Kirk's crew. How about some characters who were actually part of Pike's crew? Which brings us to Uhura and Chapel. They're already aboard years before TOS. We don't actually know when Uhura came aboard, so there's no real issue there. Christine Chapel, on the other hand, is a continuity question mark at the very least. The TOS episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of, pretty strongly implied she had only recently signed aboard the Enterprise in hopes of finding her lost fiancé, Dr. Corby. So why is she on the Enterprise now? Now, I suppose, to be fair, the exact quote from the episode, Kirk says to Christine, quote, "I understand you gave up a career in bio research to sign aboard a starship," end quote. I guess technically he doesn't really say when she signed up. I suppose it could have been a decade ago and she's been there years longer than Kirk has, but that's not at all how it came across in context. The implication was that this was a very recent development. That said, the pilot episode of Strange New Worlds does seem to emphasize that she's on some kind of temporary assignment, so that may offer some additional wiggle room as far as continuity, but I don't know. It seems really convenient. Do the showrunners know about Dr. Corby? Hopefully, maybe he'll even show up in the series. If so, that could even be interesting. We'll see.
She's apparently a genetic engineer all of a sudden. I guess that does fall under bioresearch, but I thought the Federation was so anti-genetic engineering, but with that thought, doesn't that just perfectly segue into the biggest canonical elephant in the room? La'an Noonien-Singh. Apparently some form of descendant from Khan Noonien-Singh. Nothing could possibly go wrong.
Again, no question an interesting character.
No question she's being primed to be this series' breakout character. That's what they want her to be. That's what they wanted for Neelix. That's what they wanted for Wesley. You can't force a breakout character. A breakout character has to be a breakout character naturally, organically. But Hollywood tries this all the time to try to push a breakout character, and every time they do that, they almost fail every time. Although admittedly, this is not a terrible introduction, and Christina Chong plays the role well. But again, it's just so convenient that she is on the Enterprise. Not that she exists, but that she's on the Enterprise. You would think that it's something that would be mentioned by both Spock and Uhura in Space Seed. Well, especially Uhura. Spock, can be a little tight-lipped, but I think Uhura would kind of take Kirk aside and say, what a coincidence. We actually served with his great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter on this very ship when it was, twice the size that it is now. Never mind that. Gee, it's the mother of all coincidences that it's the Enterprise which will one day just happen upon the Botany Bay. My, what a small universe space is. Again, La'an's presence on the Enterprise isn't really a continuity violation, but it is certainly a ridiculously convenient universe-shrinking coincidence which strains credibility. Let's see what they do with it, but come on. Spock was in the cage. He needs to be there. But Uhura, Chapel, a descendant of Khan, Kirk's goddamn brother, who was introduced as a civilian when he's, spoiler alert, will die on Deneva on the original series. So not only is he in Starfleet, he was a civilian. Sure, he could have been in Starfleet in the past, but what do you know? He also served on the Enterprise. Wow! These are ham-fisted member berries. It's like, yes, Alex, yes, Akiva, we know who these characters are. Do you? Here's an idea. Why don't you stop scrolling Memory Alpha and actually watch Star Trek? And then we'll talk about rewriting, reimagining the backstories of every legacy Star Trek character who has ever existed. How about that? Is that too much to ask? How about watching the goddamn show first? Okay, let me walk that back. As I've already pointed out, it has gotten a whole lot better. It seems that somebody at Secret Hideout, I'm not sure about Alex Kurtzman, but somebody at Secret Hideout is finally starting to actually watch Star Trek. Yeah, after 5 years of running the franchise. In fact, I'll give them credit for that scene in the turbolift with Uhura and the alien who's frightened out of his mind, and she speaks with him with such kindness and empathy and calms him down. That actually is pure Uhura. That's exactly what she would say. That was good writing, and Celia Rose Gooding played it beautifully. Only Nichelle Nichols herself could have done it better. She did a great job. Okay, that was actually good. But if we're going to bring in these characters, then it has to be good. It can't just be a stunt. I want to feel that the casting of these legacy characters is sincere and not patronizing. And it still can be. So let's think about this. We've got not one, but two series that are bringing in a Khan storyline, or Khan-related storyline. We got La'an, and we got stuff happening with Adam Soong over on Picard. If it's handled correctly, there are some interesting continuity through lines that might actually be explored here regarding the elusive alternative history of the Eugenics Wars. Or they're about to completely screw it up, just like Star Trek Picard
just finished ruining Assignment Earth, one of my favorite episodes of all time. Yep, Picard just broke it. Clearly they didn't watch it. They obviously didn't watch Time's Arrow, but gleefully drove by both of them, guns blazing, then had Wesley Crusher jump out of the car and deliver the final fatal headshots, grinning ear to ear. So, no, I'm not confident. However, one thing Picard Season 2 actually got right, or at least sort of right, they openly embrace the idea that the 2024 of Star Trek history is not our 2024. We in real life are not prepared to send a manned mission to Europa 2 years from now. There are also no horror-inducing high-crime sanctuary districts for homeless people in San Francisco. Oh wait, holy crap. Well, okay, there's not going to be any manned missions to the outer edges of the solar system in a mere 2 years in our reality. Samuel Roykirk and Nomad never existed. The prototype space shuttle in the opening titles of Enterprise was actually designed, but it never actually flew. But in the reality of Star Trek, in the reality of Picard Season 2, it did. These alternate history events in Star Trek canon did take place, and Picard, to their credit, did not retcon them. Well, actually, their Europa mission they made up, but it means that the Saturn mission with Sean Jeffrey Christopher probably did take place. The Deep Space mission with Colonel Stephen Ritchie will take place only 15 years from now, at a time when in our reality, such a technological feat could not possibly happen. But in the timeline of Star Trek, it will and it did. So, what about those eugenic wars? In Strange New Worlds, Pike implies that our second American Civil War of the 2020s leads into the eugenics wars, which leads into World War III. Well, that seems like a continuity error. The eugenics wars are supposed to have occurred in the 1990s, not the 2020s, or later. On Enterprise, Phlox even confirmed that the augment embryos were created in the 20th, not 21st, the 20th century. And for those who insist that Voyager's future end made no reference to Khan or the eugenics wars, wrong. You were not paying attention. There was a model of a DY-100 sleeper ship clearly visible in Rain Robinson's office in 1996, the very same year the Botany Bay was launched into deep space, according to both Space Seed and the Wrath of Khan, in very specific, non-ambiguous language.
Never told you how the Enterprise picked up the Botany Bay lost in space from the year 1996. Myself, the ship's company in cryogenic freeze.
1996. It happened, and it happened in the 1990s, period. And that should not be an issue because Picard just reaffirmed that their 2024 is not our 2024, nor was it our 1990s. Unless Picard and Strange New Worlds are getting ready to retcon that regardless. Or maybe Pike just did in his speech to the dueling aliens, or did he? It's eugenics wars, plural, meaning there was more than one. Maybe the 1990s were only the first round. In Picard Season 2, Leah Thompson plays some kind of bureaucrat on some science board which denies Adam Soong the clearance and funding he needs to complete his work in genetic engineering, and Leah Thompson is outraged, horrifying. This is a direct violation of whatever the hell international treaty that does not exist in our reality, but it does exist in theirs, clearly in response to something horrible that happened in their past. Gee, I wonder what that could be. In the season finale, Soong pulls out a dusty classified document titled Project Khan, dated June 7th, 1996. Now, that could be interpreted in a couple of ways. That could mean a canon-breaking retcon in which the augments were only a proposal in the 90s and Soong is going to make it happen in the present day.
1996.
Or, hopefully, the Leah Thompson scene is evidence that Khan Noonien-Singh had already risen to power in the 90s and was exiled into deep space 28 years ago,
1996.
And now Soong is going to revisit that old eugenics research to combine it with his own failed attempts. La'an Noonien-Singh on Strange New Worlds could end up being an offshoot of either one of those scenarios, and I hope it's the latter, which maintains the original canonical time frame and allows for what Captain Pike says to also be true. Consider this. In 1967, the year Space Seed was filmed, Ricardo Montalban was already 47 years old the first time he played Khan. Assuming Khan was more or less the same age as the actor, even then the writers would have known that Khan would have already been born somewhere around 1949-1950-ish, years before they had even written it. They were not speculating about some far-off future tech, not realizing that such a thing couldn't possibly happen in the 1990s because something akin to it had already happened decades prior. Nazi Germany, among others, had already been experimenting in eugenics going back to the 1930s in real life, hoping to create the perfect Aryan super soldier. Khan specifically mentioned being a superior product of selective breeding and genome manipulation, the implication being some fictionalized offshoot of Nazi-style research, that he was a fictionalized triumph where others in real life had failed. Yes, the writers knew that Khan would have already had to be alive in 1967. He would be around 18 years old at the time that they wrote it. They knew this. They were fictionalizing a plausible, albeit exaggerated technology, which in a fictional setting would have already occurred years prior to 1967 when they wrote it. Aside from the Botany Bay, it had nothing to do with not understanding the technologies of the future. They were knowingly fictionalizing the science of their own present day in the 1960s. So what if Adam Soong were to revisit that pre-existing research? Not even from the 1990s, but it would have been from the 1940s and 50s, and combine that with his own failed research in a more advanced form of genetic engineering, leading to a second, far worse round of eugenics wars and ultimately World War III, which would line up quite nicely with what was being described in Strange New Worlds, what was described on Enterprise, and even involved the continued research of Eric Soong, and still lines up with Space Seed and the Wrath of Khan, without significant retconning. All of those roads can lead to La'an. That would be incredible. So they probably won't do any of that. They will probably retcon it and say that Adam Soong created Khan because Discoveryverse. The same retcon Star Trek universe in which the Gorn are an already known threat to the Federation a decade prior to Kirk's first contact. Indeed, it was the Gorn who just happened to torture young La'an, according to the Strange New Worlds pilot, and are the subject of a dossier being read by Captain Pike in the same episode. And speaking of creepy genetic manipulation and resequencing, which the Federation tends to frown upon anyway, but that doesn't matter because Nurse Chapel is suddenly an expert in it, and that's how landing parties, away teams, are now being prepped for blending in among alien populations, as opposed to simple makeup or surgeries, as will be the standard years later. Christine has no qualms rewriting people's DNA for an away mission. No ethical or health concerns with that, I guess.
And how did they even get a sample of this alien race's DNA in the first place? They hadn't even beamed down yet.
Last but not least, Strange New Worlds unfortunately carries over Discovery's retcon that TNG-style replicators are already a thing, but worse than that, the landing parties under Pike's command some 6 or 7 years before Kirk don't bother to put on costumes before they step onto the transporter pad. No, they beam down wearing their uniforms while Transporter Chief Kyle beams or possibly replicates costumes around them mid-transport, because apparently that's a thing pre-TOS and not stupid at all. So there you have some of the questionable issues, or at least questions. And that's just in the pilot. But at the same time, it may not sound like it, but I actually enjoyed it. It mostly didn't suck. It was mostly pretty good. It was, holy crap, it was actually Star Trek. Yes, it's a spin-off of Discovery, which they torpedoed into the 32nd century so as to be, quote, free from canon, their words, only to ironically turn right around and create a spin-off set in the exact same time period they were trying to escape from, meaning they are not going to be free from canon after all. And yet, I'll applaud them. they seem to be making a legitimate effort to not make the same mistakes. It's a spin-off of Discovery, but it's nothing like Discovery. It actually does look and feel like the legitimate TOS prequel that Discovery should have been. And even the continuity concerns, not violations, at least not yet. Well, there's a couple of them I already mentioned, but nothing too terribly egregious thus far. I just have some concerns, things that could become problems. But concerns, which I've now talked about in some detail, they're actually all pretty minor. None of them are deal breakers. They mostly can be explained within the existing continuity. Mostly. Some of them a little too conveniently. But unlike Discovery, which was an incoherent disaster from beginning to end. I'm looking forward to more Strange New Worlds. I'm cautiously optimistic. To their credit, they have learned some lessons. They have clearly begun better due diligence in researching the source material. Hell, maybe they even actually started to watch a few episodes. But I'm nervous. I want to love this. And I almost do, just based on the pilot. However, as I'll talk about in my upcoming third installment of Picard vs. Discovery, they have a frustrating tendency to set up a rather promising premiere only to spiral into complete incoherence by mid-season and who cares anymore by the finale. I'm hoping that Strange New World's refreshingly old-school formula of self-contained episodes will help alleviate some of that. And if the pilot is any measure, there's at least some indication that maybe they have finally taken some time and trouble to at least watch the original series they are actively writing a prequel to. I mean, seriously, it's a short series, 3 seasons. You could knock it out in less than a week, and they've had 5 years to do it. There's no more excuses. We're counting on you. And despite my, 45 minutes of nitpicking, I actually thought this was pretty great. At least a great start, but who cares what I think? From deep in the heart of Texas, I am Moonjumper. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, clang that notification bell, and don't forget to find me on Rumble, and I will see y'all next time.